Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Mindy Mandell. Now, at the time of this recording, I'm also doing a read-along series on Plato's statesman. Plato plays with the double meaning of the idea of a statesman. There is, of course, the mundane level where you're talking about a politician who ideally looks to law and acts in a way that is virtuous and beneficial for the people of his or her country. But there's also another layer at which he plays with this word, where you're talking about the person who looks to divine law and has order and a state of virtue in his or her own soul, and then acts in a way that is beneficial, that manifests that goodness into the world. So you've got these two levels, the philosophical level and the mundane level. With that in mind, then he puts in a myth, and this is something that I had just covered at the time of this recording. I just covered in that read-along group, where there's the myth of what is called mythologically the Era of Cronus and the Era of Zeus. And so I talked a little bit about how to understand that myth in a metaphysical sense. And so with that in mind, I thought it might be fun to take a look at what Proclus did with this myth. So in this video, what I want to do is take a look in his Theology of Plato, and this is a Thomas Taylor translation, and we're going to look at a chapter, there we go. We're going to look at a chapter in Book 5. This is chapter 9 of Book 5, where he is going to touch on this myth. So as always, I'm going to put a link in the description box for a PDF, for the same PDF there that I'm using here. And so you can follow along if you don't already have the text. Also, I would invite you, if you don't want to bother with downloading the PDF, to take screenshots of this chapter, of each of the pages. It's not very long, and that way you can read through it again on your own and think about it more deeply. That in mind, let's jump into it. Okay, so it starts off, if, however, it be requisite from these things, of course, carrying on from the previous chapters, and from all the mystic discipline concerning this God, to consider and discuss the orders which he constitutes and holds. In the first place, and he's talking here about Cronus, by the way. In the first place, we must direct our attention to the three kings mentioned in the dialogue Gorgias, who, distributing the kingdom of Saturn, were produced by him. Saturn is the Roman name for Cronus, and I don't know why Thomas Taylor used the Roman names, but I will call it Cronus whenever I see Saturn. Okay. So in the dialogue Gorgias, there is a myth which describes the distributing of the kingdom of Cronus, and as being allotted in a divided manner, a uniform and impartible dominion, and over whom he places the divine law, which is the cause of distribution according to intellect, both to the gods themselves and to all the natures posterior to the gods. Now, divine law is going to come up throughout this chapter, and we'll see that it's very closely tied to Cronus. Cronus is metaphysically intelligible intellect, and as intelligible, it means that he transcends the intellectual world. He's like the monad, you might call him the transcendent monad of the intellectual world. So he's beyond the intellectual world, but he's the monad of he's an intellect. And his father Uranus is an even higher intellect. But we're going to see that divine law is closely tied to him. And divine law is defined here as the cause of distribution according to intellect. Now, in the second place, we must consider the rulers and kings mentioned in the dialogue laws, who are said to preside over the different allotments of souls, and who are not men, but daimons of a more divine and excellent genus, who distribute to souls the measures of good, cut off their generation-producing lives, restrain their disorderly elation, retain them in the intelligible, and comprehend them in the kingdom of Cronus. Now we're going to really focus on the third one, and he's going to mention here politicus, and politicus is another translation for statesman. So wherever you see politicus, it's what we generally call the statesman. Okay, in the third place, therefore, we must direct our attention to the daimon gods who preside over the parts of the world and the herds of souls that are in it, as the Elean guest says in the statesman, and who at one time come into contact with the objects of their government and distribute to them intellectual and all unapparent goods, but at another time withdraw themselves from the physical life of the world, recur to their own place of survey, and imitate the exempt transcendency of the demiurgus and father of the universe. This reference to the demiurgus and father of the universe is a reference to Zeus. But after these things, we must survey the twofold circulations of the mundane gods, namely the Saturnian and the Jovian. And again, those are the Roman names, so we're talking about Cronus and his son Zeus. And so this is really what the myth in the statesman was focusing on here, was that in the Cronian era, what was called in the myth the Era of Cronus, all revolved in a certain direction. Didn't say which direction, but it all revolves in a certain direction, and then in the era of Zeus, it all reverts the opposite direction. So it goes on to say that we must survey the twofold circulations of the mundane gods, talking about the era of Cronus and the era of Zeus. For these gods always have each of these, as the fable says in the Politicus or Statesman. For it is evident that the mutation of the stars and the sun takes place in each of the revolutions. This period, therefore, being twofold, it is obvious to everyone that the periods are full of Cronian goods and participate of the Cronian series. And again, remember, Chronos is intelligible intellect. And so when we're talking about partaking of his series, we're talking about intelligibles, or those that participate in nous. He's an intellectual god as well. We're talking about participating in nous in the highest sense. Not only the mundane gods, but likewise all the more excellent genera that follow the gods. Excuse me. They energize according to both of these energies, and revolve according to the twofold circulations, through which souls also sometimes participate of an intellectual life, and proceed in this path, exchanging for sense intellect as the leader of their motion and circulation. And this is key to understanding the myth. Let me highlight this sentence here. Because what we saw in that myth is what happens to people when they participate in the era of Cronus versus the era of Zeus. And in mythology, we can talk about eras. We can talk about Cronus being prior to Zeus because he's the father. When we try to understand this in terms of metaphysics, of course, we're dealing with realms that are outside of time. And so it's not in a linear time sense that we're talking about a certain era versus another one. It's what is metaphysically prior. So Cronus as the father is metaphysically prior to his son Zeus. So again, Cronus is a transcendent monad of the intellectual world, whereas Zeus as intellect is the intellect that unfolds our physical world. And so that's also why he's called the demiurgos, which literally means a worker god. And so he would be kind of like the equivalent of the biblical God who unfolded the universe in 7 days. Of course, they're very different because they're different systems. But as far as the placement in the system, that's where he would be. And so, of course, in the Greek system, there are many gods, many causes prior to the God who unfolds all. But we see here that souls, when they participate in an intellectual life, to participate in the realm of, or in the era of Chronos, means to participate in nous and to enjoy those higher energies of that realm. And so they're exchanging sense intellect as the leader of their motion and circulation for this higher kind of energy, the intellectual life, the life of nous. And so Saturn, or Chronos, therefore, extends his kingdom supernally from the first gods as far as to partial souls, and our souls are called partial souls in Proclus's system, perfects all things and fills them with intellectual goods, distributing to different natures, excuse me, sorry. Let me read that over again. So Chronos, therefore, extends his kingdom supernally from the first gods, as far as to partial souls. He perfects all things and fills them with intellectual goods, distributing to different natures different measures of good. And the law of providence states that we each participate in this good to the degree that we're able. And that is why different measures to different souls. For on account of this, law also subsists with him, as Socrates says in the dialogue Gorgias. And here's a quote from Gorgias. This law, therefore, was in the time of Chronos, and always was, and now is, among the gods. For law is the distribution of intellect. There is a definition of law. The distribution of intellect. So also something to keep in mind for those of you who are reading The Statesman now. Law is the distribution of intellect. But this God is the first, most pure, and incorruptible intellect. Again, he is the transcendent monad of the intellectual realm. If, however, this God is the primary leader of all division, as I should pause here and just explain that as a transcendent God, as a God who is separate from his realm, he brings this separation. Also within the intelligible realm, you have three monads there. You have the abiding term, the proceeding term, and the reverting term. And another way to think about it is that all abides as one in intelligible being. The next monad would be intelligible life, which also, by the way, is mythologically associated with Kronos' father, Uranus. He is the proceeding term, and so there's where you have the first kind of separating of all that is unified in intelligible being. But it's in intelligible intellect when there is enough separation for there to be a distribution according to law. The distribution of intellect according to law, and that is the term that can then revert back and know itself. And so it's the intellectual aspect of the intelligible realm. And so that's the metaphysics behind what he's talking about here. This is the leader of division, and that this is where there is that first separation of the complete unity of intelligible being. So if, however, this God is the primary leader of all division and is the origin of intellectual separation, it is necessary on this account that law should be with him, which distinguishes the orders of being. It divides the intellectual genera and it separates all forms according to a well-ordered progression. But it imparts to all things by illumination the measure of hyparxis, connecting the order which is in them, preserving the boundaries of divine distribution immutable, and possessing the same dignity in the kingdom of Chronos and in intellectuals as Adrastia, who's sometimes translated as necessity, as what she possesses in the super-celestial place and in the intelligible and at the same time intellectual orders. And that order, by the way, follows from Uranus, and Uranus is also the central figure in that world, follows from intelligible life. So there you're seeing a bit of the metaphysics behind these mythological gods that are discussed in the myth in the Statesman. For from each of them, and this is again Cronus and Adrastia, from each of them an immutable guard and the progression of order to all things are generated. But they differ from each other because law indeed divides the one into multitude, this is Cronus, defines the measures of intellectual subsistence and distributes to everything an appropriate good, producing the different measures of beings from that one Cronian intellect. But Adrastia, or necessity, abiding in the intelligible, she guards all things uniformly and preserves total order in a firm, undeviating manner, exempt from all division. Law, therefore, is a certain God. He's telling us that law is a God which divides divine forms and definitely imparts to everything that which is adapted to it according to the plenitude proceeding from one uniform cause. And it is also coexistent with the Cronian order, in which the separation of beings and the all-perfect progression of forms first subsists. So the separation of beings and the all-perfect progression of forms first subsist. So the intelligible forms or ideas or eidos, they are in intelligible being as well in that first triad, if you will. But it's really intelligible intellect that we call the home of the forms, because in being, all is unified together, whereas there is a separation by the time you get to intellect. And so again, here is where you first have that progression. And so the separation of beings and the progression of forms subsists here. And so this is, and it is from here then that the forms can manifest, can proceed and unfold from the intelligible realm. So this is called the home of the forms, and it is it is where again the progression of forms first subsists. So hence the demiurgus, or Zeus, the maker god, the worker god, he likewise is looking to this, and he conducts all things according to law and constitutes mundane providence, an image of the union of the Father. But fate and the fatal laws is an image of the division according to law. So now I'm going to make a reference to another dialogue. Some of you may not yet have read the Timaeus. Those of you who have may recognize what I'm saying here. For those of you who have not, this is something to look for when you read that dialogue. But in that dialogue, we see Zeus looking to his father, intelligible intellect, as the paradigm of all that is, because that's the home of the forms. And he uses that as a model from which to unfold our physical world. And that is what is being discussed here. Zeus, the demiurgus, is looking to this, to Kronos, the home of the forms. And looking at that, he conducts all things according to law, and he constitutes mundane providence, an image of the union of the Father. So the providence here in our world, what you're calling here mundane providence, is an image of the providence in intelligible intellect. But fate and the fatal laws is an image of the division according to law. So in the realm of Cronus, in the era of Cronus, you have providential law, whereas in the realm or the era of Zeus, you have the laws of fate. We are all subject to fate. We're born, we die, our bodies get sick. It's inevitable. It can't be avoided. There's a certain natural law that we are all subject to, but also we have our conditioning. And as long as we stay within the realm of our conditioning, we're going to follow, it's going to play itself out, and we're going to follow that pattern. But we can always jump outside of it. We can participate in news, and we can enjoy those higher energies, and we can function in a higher way. And that's really what that myth is all about and what's being discussed here. So souls, therefore, live according to law, In the Jovian period, or the era of Zeus, they're indeed being governed conformably to the laws of fate. But in the Cronian period, they're living according to divine law, and they are subservient to the multitude of divine forms and extended to the one cause of all, so we can enjoy those higher energies. And ascending to the intelligible place of survey, they are subjected to the sacred law of adrastia. For this law extends from on high as far as to the last of things, and defines to souls the measures of whole periods, as Socrates says in the dialogue Phaedrus. So he's jumping all over the place, right? Who therefore this greatest God is, and what the gods are of which he is the cause to souls, and prior to these to gods and daimons, the leaders of souls, let it from these things be manifest. Okay, we'll stop it there. Again, I do encourage you to look this over on your own, either with screenshots or by downloading the PDF. If you have any questions or any comments, anything you'd like to add to this conversation, please put that below. And as always, I thank you for watching. Till next time.